Hi there, and welcome back to the Dutch Podcast. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Smeaton, and on this podcast, we dive into the vast and ever-evolving world of hormones as part of our lifelong pursuit of better health. Here at Dutch, we've dedicated over a decade to transforming lives by addressing hormonal imbalances like cycle irregularities, perimenopause, menopause, and more. Our mission is clear: to simplify and advance hormonal health for everyone. On this podcast, I get to bring you cutting-edge insights from our top experts on hormone therapy, menopause, personalized medicine, and more. We're all aimed at making a real difference in your well-being. Your questions and feedback are crucial. They shape our discussions and help us navigate the complexities of hormone health together. Now, as always, please remember the content of this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, should not be considered medical advice. Be sure to consult your healthcare provider for medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dutch Podcast Live. I'm really excited to have Colleen Cutcliffe join with me today. She's with Pendulum Probiotics, which have really made a splash in the industry over the last several years, really innovating in the probiotic and digestive health space. So I want to share a little bit about Colleen, and then I'm really excited to dive in and let her share more about what she's seen on how probiotics and gut health can really impact overall health and longevity, because there's a lot to talk about there. Before we dive in, Colleen Cutcliffe is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Pendulum. She's more than 15 years of experience leading and managing biology teams across academia, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology. And prior to starting Pendulum, Colleen was the Senior Manager of Biology at Pacific Biosciences, quite a big company, and a scientist at Elan Pharmaceuticals. Colleen completed her postdoctorate studies at Northwestern's Children's Memorial Hospital, and she received her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from Johns Hopkins and her bachelor's in biochem from Wellesley, another Mass native. That's where I live. Oh, nice. So welcome. It's so nice to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'd love to start with just your story. Where did the idea for Pendulum come from? And, why did you decide to kind of move into that space in science and in health?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things about the microbiome is that up until about 10 or 20 years ago, there was very little data that supported what were actual targets in the microbiome. And so you have a lot of probiotics and yogurts that have been on shelves for a very long time, but DNA sequencing technologies are actually what enabled us to fully sequence the entire microbiome and understand what are these bugs doing, how do they interact with each other, and how do they potentially help us in human health beyond just kind of GI issues. And so for me, I was in a DNA sequencing instrument company. It was a huge opportunity to apply this technology in a new field of medicine that I think we all inherently know our gut health is important for us. And the science is just now catching up to that gut feeling, if we want to start with the stupid puns now. And so for me, there was this huge opportunity to really tackle the microbiome and human health from a different angle, which is rather than going after pharmaceutical drugs and the kind of typical way in which you develop interventions, go after the gut microbiome. And it started with, what is the gut microbiome, what's in it, and how do you start to target it?
I just interviewed Dr. Darshan Shah, and he called the gut the billion-dollar pharmaceutical factory that we all carry around with us. And really, it is amazing the more you learn about the byproducts. I know we have like prebiotics and probiotics, but now we're learning about postbiotics too, and just the impact that different strains of bacteria have on production of compounds that influence our overall health. So, this is a fascinating field. We're going to have so much to talk about today, but for people who are really just learning, because our podcast listeners are a lot of practitioners who are probably here because they really want to advance their understanding of the microbiome, but also a lot of patients. And I think it can be surprising for patients to really realize just how big of an impact the gut microbiome can have on their health. And now, thankfully, microbiomes everywhere. We're all hearing about it. But since you've entered the space, what have been the biggest surprises that you've learned about some kind of impact between something in the microbiome in the gut and a human health condition that would normally seem unrelated?
Well, I think the first surprise is how little we've been able to target the microbiome to date. And so there are a lot of probiotics that are on the shelves right now. And if you have ever stood in a drugstore or a Whole Foods and just been overwhelmed by everything on the shelf, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And one of the things that surprised me was how similar all of those products actually are to each other. There's a lot of marketing innovation that's happened, but not a lot of actually ingredient innovation. And even companies that come out and say they've got a new strain, it's really very subtly different from the strains that are already out there. And so we haven't really been able to tackle an entirely new part of the microbiome or a new part of health through those. So the first thing was surprising to me is, oh my gosh, how little is available to us as consumers out there and how much more we could be getting access to. I think the second thing is we really went after the gut metabolism axis, and GLP-1s have become super popular nowadays. We've been targeting it for over a decade before anybody knew what GLP-1 was, and I love that everyone knows what it is now and how important it is for our bodies and for our metabolic health. And what a lot of people don't know is those GLP-1 drugs are a mimic of our body's natural GLP-1 hormone. And so your body makes its own natural GLP-1 hormone, and when it's making it in the right doses and in the right cycles, you actually get all those benefits of good weight, good metabolism of your sugars, good satiety, not overeating, and the microbiome is what stimulates GLP-1 production. And so probably the second most surprising and awesome thing is that you can impact your GLP-1 levels through your microbiome in a really completely natural way, and that you can use through certain design strains of probiotic formulations. You can actually lower your A1C and your blood glucose spikes through a probiotic alone.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I want to spend more time diving into GLP-1s. One of the things you talked about was kind of innovation in the probiotic space. And I think I've seen that too. It was all like, lacto and bifidobacterium that you see across the board. Tell me a little bit about some of the challenges of bringing new strains to market, because I think, we think, if it's in the gut, let's just put it in a capsule and we'll deliver it. But it's not that simple, right? There's a lot more complexity to figuring out if a strain can make it, how it will survive.
Yes, I think that if we hadn't had this simplistic view that you just make it and throw it in a capsule and give it to people, we probably never would have started this company. Because you're right, it turns out it's actually pretty hard to bring these strains to market.
Yes.
The first challenge was, as you alluded to, actually growing the strains. For sure, we thought we'll just outsource these growth. I mean, people have been manufacturing probiotics around the world forever. And so we thought, we'll identify these strains, we'll hand them off to a contract manufacturer, they'll make them, throw them in a pill, and then we'll sell them. Well, first of all, the gut microbiome, that when we think about the gut microbiome and all the new science coming out of it, it's actually located in the distal colon. So that means, you eat food, it goes into the stomach, so it gets through the stomach acid, through the entire GI tract to the distal part of the GI, the distal colon. That's where all the action is. So when people say gut microbiome, they're really talking about the distal colon.
I didn't know that it was like more of the lower third of the colon or something.
Exactly.
Okay, right.
And in the distal colon, there's no oxygen. So by the time you get all the way there, there's actually no oxygen there. So a lot of these next generation strains can't even survive with any oxygen. Well, there's oxygen everywhere. And so it turns out when you try to manufacture them in just a regular plant, they were all dying because you had to create this closed end-to-end system that kept all the oxygen out. So the first was, these are actually really hard to grow. And the second was, how do you then deliver them all the way back to the distal colon? So if you really want to deliver them back, you need to have an enteric coating, which gets them to through the stomach acid, and a time-delayed release that gets them all the way to the distal colon. And so there's how do you grow the strains? How do you get them into a capsule that's alive, in a live fashion? How do you then deliver it? And then how do you hope that they colonize? And so we ended up including small amounts of prebiotic with the strains in order to help them kind of have the food that they're going to eat. I always think about it like, if you're going to drop me on a deserted island, I'd love it if you drop me off with a cooler full of beers and sandwiches. So we're giving them their beers and sandwiches so they have food to eat when they first kind of re-enter the world. And then they have to colonize and do their activity. And so there's actually a lot of steps in between discovering theoretical intervention and then actually delivering on that promise.
I think there's a lot of value in people understanding the number of steps it takes to make an effective product and bring it to market. Because, and I'm grateful that you weren't as aligned with that complexity at the outside, because you wouldn't be where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part is also regulatory, because when it truly is a new strain, you have to do all the safety studies to make sure that you're not giving people something that's going to be harmful to them.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about how you identified the strains that have really become the keystone strains that you're utilizing in Pendulum's products.
Well, it took us 8 short years I mean, it really was 8 years of R&D before we got anywhere with a formulation, but we were doing a ton of DNA sequencing. We did sequencing of twins that were discordant, where one twin is healthy, the other twin is obese or has diabetes. Wow. We were pulling data in from around the world on studies people were doing around metabolism and the differences between healthy people and people with metabolic syndrome. And then we were essentially taking those genetic sequences and saying, okay, are there genes in here where you could identify a potential mechanism of action of how they're, why a person who's healthy might have a ton of them and a person who's sick is missing them? Like, what are they doing in that healthy person's body? And so it was a lot of DNA sequencing, biochemical assays, preclinical trials, clinical trials, in order to identify strains that were doing two really important functions. One is metabolizing fiber into short-chain fatty acids. The other is regulating the mucin layer of your gut lining.
And so what are some of those strains that are really highlighted in Pendulum products that make your company so unique?
Well, probably one of the more famous divas. I call them divas because they were so hard to grow. One of the more famous ones is Akkermansia mucinophila. And this strain, it was just discovered in the early 2000s by Dr. Lee Kaplan at Harvard MGH. He was actually a bariatric surgeon. I was trying to understand after bariatric surgery why people were immediately having resolution of their diabetes symptoms and realized this must be something hormonal. So he's looking to the gut microbiome. And what we've learned over the last 15 or 20 years about Akkermansia has just been exponential growth of knowledge of this strain. And it does two important things. One, it stimulates your body's natural GLP-1 hormone. There have only ever been 2 strains in the world published to be able to directly stimulate GLP-1, and Akkermansia is one of them. And the second thing it does is it's the only strain that we know of to date that actually regulates the mucin in your gut lining. So your gut lining is sort of like a wooden fence where, you have these wooden planks, they're held together by glue. Over time and seasons, the glue can start to thin, a plank can fall, and now you've got a leak in your fence. Your gut lining has exactly the same structure. You've got these epithelial cells, they're like your planks, held together by glue, which we call mucin, and Akkermansia is able to consume that mucin as well as replenish the mucin. So in other words, it's the guy standing at the fence all day and all night, stripping away the old glue when it gets old and putting up new glue to make sure that that fence is always really strong. So when you're depleted in the guy that's regulating your glue, you have all of these issues with your gut lining that show up in a wide variety of indications.
Now that's really interesting. And what you're really speaking to now is like gut integrity and microbiome and this kind of complex relationship, because Akkermansia won't grow or thrive in the environment where the gut is really inflamed and damaged, right? And I'm also hearing you talk about the fact that that could be the cause of a lot of that inflammation and damage.
Yeah, it is this sort of, it's a real feedback loop in the body where if you don't have that mucin there, you don't have anything to feed the Akkermansia because it does consume the mucin. And then it's also not there to replenish the mucin. So you can end up in a really bad catch-22 if you start to become too low in Akkermansia.
So one of the things I want to really understand or really allow our listeners to hear more about is Pendulum is really unique because you have a very strong commitment to science and to clinical studies. That's one thing that I love about your company, similar to Dutch, right? So can you tell us a little bit more, like, as you bring Akkermansia to market, what are the types of research that you've done or that you're really proud of that you've really been able to highlight through the product development process?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's not just the research we've done, but we collaborate with a lot of universities and clinical organizations to create data, because I think it's all about the different efficacy you see across different populations. And we certainly couldn't afford to do all those trials on our own. But probably the study that I'm most proud of is a formulation that contains Akkermansia as one of the strains in there. And this is a formulation which is designed to help people with type 2 diabetes. And we did a placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized trial that was published in BMJ. And what it showed was that for people who were on this formulation compared to placebo, after being on it for 90 days, they were able to see their A1Cs go down by 0.6 and their blood glucose spikes go down by 33%. And the majority of the people in that study were already on metformin. So this is on top of metformin. And it just goes to show you that holy smokes, the gut microbiome is this entirely untapped opportunity, and we could all be benefiting so incredibly from it if we just had the right gut microbes and the right tools.
Yeah. Are you seeing kind of acceptance or like encompassing in the metabolic health space where physicians are starting to look more to these multi-layers of therapeutics and adding on products like the GLP-1 products or like Pendulum's products to metabolic health protocols?
I think it's such an interesting time to be in the medical community.
Absolutely.
Right now because, 10 years ago, it was all very fringe. I mean, no real doctor, is going to talk about any kind of supplements. And I feel like what's happened because all of these companies have really invested in generating data and clinical science and outcomes that are using gold standard diagnostic tests, you start to see a larger and larger adoption. At the same time that all of that's happening, consumers have really taken health into their own hands. And so now they're coming to their doctor with, hey, I'm taking these for these reasons. And then as a doctor or a practitioner, well, you better be knowledgeable in what your patient is coming to you with because they're showing you data. And if you don't know it, that's kind of embarrassing. And so we start to see a lot more practitioners getting a lot more curious about the space because there's more data and because consumers are really pushing them on it. I don't know if you've read Eric Topol's book, The Patient Will See You Now.
No, but this whole movement I am 100% behind.
Exactly. And, it not to get into like too much of a soapbox on this, but the most unfortunate thing about healthcare right now in this space that we're both operating in is that nothing is covered. Mm-hmm. And if you're not a pharmaceutical drug that's gone through the pharmaceutical, the FDA path, and gotten insurance, on board with you, which is a very closed loop system between pharma, the FDA, and insurance companies. If you're outside of that very closed loop, like you are with a supplement, you can't break into it. And it's a shame because if you look at the outcomes and you look at the benefits people have, they can reduce their GLP-1 dose with the right products, they can lower their A1Cs, they can feel better in multitude of ways that are all measurable. The losers in all this are us, the consumers, because we have to be able to pay out of pocket for everything that's helping us in our own health. And I hope that we are going to get to a place where coverage is based on things that actually help us and not based on a closed loop system from 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have such limited access, and you have to be a self-advocate for your health. You have to finance it. You have to do the strategy development. You really have to look into it. And I'm really grateful for so many patients today who are looking into these things for themselves. And I think a lot of physicians are also taxed for time. I mean, if you ask physicians what's challenging, it's time management. So when those patients bring those new products forward, it really serves as an innovation pipeline for providers to stay on top of what patients are utilizing and get them to take a look at it.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to probiotics, that's where more education about the different strains and what they do is going to start to be highlighted. I mean, when you were in clinical practice, how did you think about the different probiotics that are out there?
Well, one, there was very little data out there, and everything was lactobacillus and bifido. And so really we had knowledge of how children's guts were a little bit different. So there was a distinction between what you use in children under 2 and what you use in, I will just say, humans over 2, children and adults. And then there were some specific strains, like the work that Jaro did on their Femdophilus product, to actually go through clinical trials for a specific condition with specific strains. And I'm really grateful that since that time, there has been more strain-specific data. Because the thought about, I am going to say this, and you're probably going to laugh because my understanding is, I'm sure, very simplistic compared to yours. But I really think that when we look at probiotics, 20 years from now, probiotics won't be a SKU. It's going to be an entire category, the way that vitamins are, or the way that herbal medicines are. Because as we get more strain-specific information, and we get a better understanding of the patterns of functional and dysfunctional guts, and the ethnic differences and the gender differences, we're going to be able to get enough information to develop more specificity, and utilize it. I think I love the way that Dr. Shah said it, you're really stimulating production of a different pharmaceutical in the gut. And I love that picture because it's so empowering to think that just strengthening that healthy microbiome and getting some supportive microbes in there could help you transform your own health.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I completely agree with you on the level of sophistication that we're going to be at in the future. And, it's like with vitamins, if you say to someone, oh, I feel like I'm starting to get a cold, they don't say, well, just go take a vitamin. They say, okay, take some vitamin C.
Exactly.
And so we are going to get there with probiotics. I believe it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when we look back 50 years from now, the era we're in right now is like the era of the first discovery of a vitamin.
Yeah, I agree.
So I can't wait. I can't wait to get there.
Me too.
So let's talk a little bit about why the microbiome is so important for us to be talking about. I really would love to hear your perspective on the biggest areas of health that the gut microbiome impacts.
Okay, now you're talking to somebody who's in the microbiome, so I'm going to proselytize here, but I think we've often thought about, or we've historically thought about, the human body as having 11 systems in it. And what we are realizing over the last about 20 years of research is that the microbiome is tied to every one of those 11 systems. So it's not just our digestive systems, it's also our endocrine system, which is what we really work on. But there's also a lot of really cool data emerging around the gut-brain axis, the fact that your gut can produce these neurotransmitters in massive amounts. Your gut is making huge amounts of serotonin, dopamine, GABA. Why is it doing that? Why is that in your gut? Some of those are making their way to the brain and actually affecting, brain activity. You actually have neurons in your gut. What are those guys doing there? And so there's this incredible signaling that's happening between the neurons in the gut and the neurons in the brain. And probably one of the most fascinating things that's come out is that not only do you have these neurons in your gut, but it looks like traditionally the way that we think about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, which is a disease of the brain, and oh my gosh, you get these plaques that form in your neurons and in your brain, that's what you should go after. We now know that those plaques appear to show up in your gut neurons before they show up in your brain neurons.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That says there might be an earlier way to affect them, and you can affect your gut much more easily than you can affect, the brain. And so when you think about the opportunity for interventions there, it's amazing. And another disease we've often thought of as a neurological disease is autism. But you'll know if you read the literature that there are a ton of cases where you can change the diet of a child and actually change their symptoms of autism. And it's not been entirely clear exactly, it's a lot of trial and error and testing of the parents typically that gets you there. But the microbiome of children with autism is distinct from the microbiome of their healthy siblings. And so there's something really interesting there. And one of the most potent ways to affect your microbiome is through your diet. And so I think we're going to find that all these diseases where we've been going after the brain, there might be a real gut opportunity there as well. And then we were just talking about the opportunity for hormone therapy and the fact that there are a category of, department of strains. If you think about your microbiome as this big factory, there's a department in that factory which is really interacting with hormones. And so also a huge opportunity for hormone replacement therapy to have a counterpart in the microbiome.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's studies on microbiome in women with breast cancer and women without that show distinct differences. And we talk about that a lot with Dutch because we study estrogen metabolism in urine, looking at estrogen metabolites. And we know that the last step of elimination for estrogen is in the gut, and it requires a healthy gut. And when you have elevation of beta-glucuronidase made by some dysbiotic streams, you get resorption of estrogen. And let's not talk about just estrogen, many other toxins that are eliminated through glucuronidation. So we do talk about that a lot. And we've seen, we actually have early data just internally. We haven't published it in peer review, but we use a measurement in urine called indican, which does rise when there's dysbiosis. And it's not a distinct diagnostic marker. It is a general marker that when the gut's dysbiotic, indican comes up. But we have actually seen in our, tens of thousands of patients that we've done testing for, that when indican's elevated, estrogen tends to also be elevated, which goes along with that, the important role that the gut microbiome has in proper bioelimination of hormones.
Well, not only the proper elimination, but also the proper recirculation and putting things, back into circulation. And it's really interesting because we women have a very distinct microbiome from men. And so if you take a woman before menopause, or you take a person and you sequence their gut microbiome, you can tell just from that sequencing whether it came from a man or a woman. But after we go through menopause, we look like men. Can no longer tell whether that microbiome came from a man or a woman. And it's because we've lost these group of strains that distinguish us from men earlier on. And so there's a lot of opportunity to think about how do we bring back some of those strains that really are interacting with these hormones, or how do we help us not kind of feel like we're falling off a cliff as we're going through perimenopause and menopause.
And it does make you think about some of the impact of hormone therapy on disease later on in life. Like, for example, we know estrogen replacement therapy can improve cardiovascular marker as well. Is that a direct effect of estrogen, or is that effect of estrogen influence on the microbiome and on the microbiome's influence on cardiovascular markers? It's really a fascinating thing to think about. And there's been, my whole practice is women's health. And so I look at this a lot, and the microbiome has been an area of particular interest for me lately, just because there's so much innovation happening in the research. And even progesterone, progesterone's been known to prevent miscarriage for a long time. And of course, it rises so much in pregnancy, but progesterone also causes distinct changes in the microbiome. And there's been some mice studies showing that miscarriage rates go down with those microbiome changes. So it does open up the world. Like, when we think about the role that hormones have on health, I really think about whether the microbiome is a meaningful intermediate step that we've just missed as we've studied like hormone and outcome.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that, as you pointed out, the last stop before these hormones leave our body is through the gut microbiome, and that there are these systems in the microbiome to undo that and put them back in circulation or excrete them from the body. You're like, there's a major gating happening here that we haven't even tapped into yet. So it's a really big opportunity.
Absolutely. So why do some people lack Akkermansia? I want to get back to that quinoa strain because it's one that you really introduced to the market. Definitely a specialty. What leads to someone being low in it?
Well, the first thing to know about Akkermansia is that it's actually never been found on any food or beverages so far. People have been looking, and they can't find it anywhere except one place, and that's in mother's breast milk. So the idea is that you get seeded with it from mother's breast milk, and then you spend the rest of your life trying not to lose it. And so the different ways that you can lose it, one of the most potent ways you can lose it is if you have to take an antibiotic. I mean, almost every single one of us has had to take an antibiotic at some point, and that really decimates your microbiome, including Akkermansia. So if you've taken an antibiotic, that might be one really big reason why you're low in Akkermansia. If you don't have a lot of fiber and polyphenols in your diet, that's a second reason. Those are the foods that help boost Akkermansia levels. And so if you're not feeding the strain, you're going to be low in it. So if you're really good with your nutrition in terms of high fiber, high polyphenol, think about the produce section of your grocery store, the lentils and beans section. These are all great places to be able to keep Akkermansia going. Another reason you might be depleted in Akkermansia is we know that we just sort of lose it as we age. We know that we lose it when we go through periods of intense stress. We know that we lose it when we go through menopause. There are lots of just life events related to aging and stress and hormonal changes that are correlated with the loss of Akkermansia. So I think that it is amazing to me when I get to meet people who are really healthy in every other way. They're eating healthy, they're exercising, and then you give them a formulation that contains Akkermansia, and even they see health benefits from that. It's just this incredibly important strain that you can lose through a variety of ways that may have nothing to do with bad behavior, and you just need to give it back to your body.
Well, and it sounds like if you can lose it so easily and there's no food source, then it really plays a unique role, like as a supplement, as a dietary supplement, to really receive that.
It does. And if you really want to, boost a person's Akkermansia, you would supplement them with the probiotic directly, with the live Akkermansia strain and the nutrition that feeds that strain. So that's the 1-2 punch: high fiber, high polyphenol foods, and delivery of live Akkermansia. You'll get it back.
I'm really grateful that you bring that up, because I think that when it comes to the gut microbiome, diet is so critically important for maintenance and rebuilding. And so, that diversity of fiber, that and all the different prebiotics and the kind of uniqueness that they add is so critical. And I'm so grateful that for a company that's selling a product, you also acknowledge the role that diet plays in that maintenance process.
It's so important. Nutrition and the microbiome are tied at the hip. It's kind of like a high-performing car. If you're just putting in, you need really good fuel and you need a really strong engine. That's how you get your high-performing vehicle. And here, the fuel is your food and the engine is your microbiome. If you just have the good microbiome and you're putting shitty fuel in there, you're not going to get the most out of your high-performing vehicle. You
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about with Akkermansia specifically. Are there research? You talked about GLP-1 and metabolic health and the impact on blood sugar, A1C. What about other areas? Like inflammation is another one that we think a lot about with microbiome and gut health and some probiotic streams. Can you share a little bit of information about other impacts you've seen?
Yeah, inflammation is a really interesting one, and I'll maybe hone in on the skin. And so one of the kind of unexpected results that we've had with people using Akkermansia is improvements to their skin health, and to find out that there are all these dermatologists and skincare specialists who are using Akkermansia with their clients or their patients and seeing resolution of things like adult acne, eczema, atopic dermatitis. And it's sort of like, just to get back to the car analogy for 1 second, it's like your check engine light comes on and you put a piece of tape over it and you just say like, okay, I've solved the problem. That's what the topicals are like in a little bit of ways. Really what you have to do is to get in there and fix your engine. And so that's what a microbiome intervention is doing. And so when you are delivering something like Akkermansia and you're really enhancing that gut lining, you're not allowing things to leak out of the gut and create heightened inflammation, you're actually able to see it show up in all kinds of things that are related to heightened inflammation, including better skin. And so we have people who are on our products who started on it because their practitioner told them, you've got diabetes, I want you to be taking, pendulum glucose control. And then you ask the patient, why are you on it? And they say, oh my gosh, my skin looks so good. Meaning,
look, the things that matter.
The things that matter.
Well, it is interesting though, because a lot of people come in, and we're in like a longevity space. So how you feel and how your biomarkers measure, that's an important element to it. But another element of that people really do care about is hair, skin, energy, kind of these more subtle things. So, any kind of impact that's as simple and inexpensive comparatively to so many procedures out there that can help with that improvement, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah, and as we age, we're all looking for the little leg up.
That's right. I know. Well, not, you and I, not us.
Not us.
Easy for us. People. Just natural. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about like how the microbiome can influence our health span and our life. So we talked about brain health. We've talked about inflammation, talked about skin and how you feel. Are there any other areas that really stand out to you?
Yeah, I think when we think about health span, obviously we know that your ability to metabolize glucose, super important, is, having good metabolic health. And the one we haven't tackled yet is immune health. So being able to stimulate your immune response when it's supposed to be stimulated and not have it stimulated when it's not. A lot of that is regulated through the gut microbiome. Yeah. The immune system in and of itself, I just have, PTSD from classes that I took in immunology. I mean, the immune system itself is incredibly complicated. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about how to leverage the microbiome to alter the immune response is, I think, an area of incredible interest and research. But I think it's a difficult space because the on-off switches for your immune system are so sensitive and so important. It's not like, I just want this thing to always be on. You definitely don't want it to always be on, or I definitely want it to always be off. And so I think though, the gut microbiome will play an important role in the immune system. So I think your metabolic health, your immune system, your energy levels that we talked about, all of those things are important to, enjoying the process of aging. Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about where is the future headed with microbiome? I know we're starting to look at microbiomes in other organ systems. There was some cool studies on people who had more complications with COVID was related to the lung microbiome. It seems like the innovation opportunities are endless. So I'd love to know, where are you guys headed? What are you interested in? If you're willing to share, I don't want to break any R&D, secrets.
Well, I think there's still a lot more to be had on the gut metabolism axis. We're really focused on that, and how can you even more effectively boost a person's metabolism at different stages of life, in different circumstances, through the gut microbiome. And I think that certain stages of life where your hormones are different for women are a big area of interest for us.
That's fabulous, because we certainly need more targeted products that are specific to that group. And especially because you see these microbiome changes, in pregnancy, the diversity gets wiped away. Actually, it mimics the gut of someone with metabolic syndrome, from what I understand, during pregnancy. And then you have to rebuild that postpartum. And then you have perimenopause and menopause. So
Absolutely. And I think as, women think about getting pregnant, it's one of the interesting things is that your body starts to generate, all the systems needed to make breast milk way before that baby is born. And so even during pregnancy, if you want to be thinking about how do I optimize for breast milk, I think there's an interesting relationship between the gut microbiome, the breast microbiome. Akkermansia is only found in mother's breast milk. And so how does it get there? Is it important to have high levels in your gut? All of this is, I think, super interesting areas of active research. And stay tuned because we and people around the world are going to keep learning more and more and hopefully develop more tools for people to use.
I can't wait. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been so wonderful to get the chance to talk with you. And I think, we at Dutch and just generally the integrative medicine community, we're really excited about what you're up to and just grateful for the tools that you've been able to give to us as providers to share with our patients.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're wanting to learn and really expand your expertise in hormones, you're not going to want to miss our podcast. So make sure you tune in each and every week for our new content.